Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Tishbi, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Tishbi, Eliyahu Hagiladi. Welcome.
The meeting is starting.
Meeting is beginning. Please, we ask all to be cognizant of your microphones. Welcome to this wonderful occasion. Today, we are delving into Parshat Pekudei with the beautiful art from Tina Marcus and the sage teachings of Rabbi Eryn London. Over this whole series, we have a wonderful opportunity to hear from artists around the world as they explore deeply and profoundly into the insights of the Torah with their own keen eye of artistry. Today is no exception, as we are honored to have in front of us today the artist Tina Marcus, who works in arts, whereas most people today find themselves taking pictures of themselves with their phones. Tina Marcus sees art inside the pictures and canvases of every individual. And she works in mixed media assemblages, and we are very fortunate to have her today. We also have present Rabbi Eryn London, BCC, is a freelance rabbi, chaplain, and Jewish educator living in London. Following ordination, she trained and worked as a multi-faith and Jewish hospital chaplain in New York City. She is the program manager for the Honeycomb Project, a community volunteer training program, and is involved with a number of other projects within the UK and global Jewish community. Without further ado, I don't want to take any more time away because we have a beautiful, beautiful program ahead. Rabbi Eryn, would you please frame the Parsha for us?
Sure, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. It was also wonderful working with Tina over the past couple of months. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out. So Parsha Pekudei is a relatively short Parsha. And I mean, in short, it's all about building, how the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was built, and and also how the clothing of the priests and high priests were built, or not built, sewn and made. Right, so we hear about how much gold and silver and copper were donated to build the Mishkan. We hear about the very intricate details of what goes into the high priest's clothing and how that gets made, and also the very intricate details of how the priestly garments are completed and what they look like and what they sound like and what colors there are. And then towards the end, we read about everyone bringing their products to Moshe, and everyone's happy because Moshe saw that all the work was done exactly how God said that God wanted it to happen. And then God tells Moshe, okay, it's time to build the tabernacle. It's time to build the Mishkan. This should happen on the 1st of Nisan. And everything should go in its right place. Everything should be as it is. Moshe does what he's told to do. And at the very, very end, which is also the very end of the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, everything's put into order. And we read about the cloud of glory, the Anan HaKavod, and the Shekhinah, the divine presence, filling the Mishkan. and that the cloud and the fire, which is God's presence, will tell the Jewish people when they're going to be resting and when they're going to be continuing on their journey. And that is Parshat Pekudei in a nutshell.
Thank you, thank you. And now, Tina, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Rabbi DeVere, the Amen Institute, for really putting together this wonderful, innovative programming. And of course, having the experience to take a deeper dive into a personal introspection. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever it is that you might be residing right now. So before we jump into Pekudei, these are really the records of the tabernacle. I want to reiterate with a quick overview of the Parsha. And of course, I know you know that in a Jew's world, there's nothing with a quick response, but I would like to share with you where my mind went to creatively while during this study. So this week's Parsha, Pekudei, are the tallies and the records. It's all of the materials, as Rabbi Eryn laid out, the materials that were collected to make the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. So it talked about the furnishings, the garments for the priests, the breastplate, the headgear. It talked about the garments, how the garments were made. It also talked about the management and the responsibilities of the tabernacle, the tasks that were assigned to Moses, and of course, the work that was done by the Levites. So it painted the picture of the gold, the silver, the copper, the turquoise, and of course, the purple and the scarlet wools. But the Parsha also describes the stages of how the people's donations were combined, how they were brought to Moses to erect the tabernacle, and actually how they built it. So when I was reading through it, my mind lit up about all of these things that were needed to assemble to make the tabernacle, along with the vivid colors described. My mind just went all over the place. I thought, how hard could it be to respond artistically to this chapter when it's an account of all the materials collected to make the tabernacle? Simple, right? But I have to tell you, from this artist's point of view, I was quite stymied. I thought that if I were a weaver or a jewelry maker, I could create a gorgeous interpretation of a breastplate or create woven garments. I also thought about the architecture to build this space and to assemble all of its components. I also thought about the colors, their meanings, in which rabbis and of course scholars numerously expound on this subject and will continue expounding for years to come. But for me, to recreate any of these just did not feel authentic. I am a painter, I'm an assemblage artist. I use powdered pigments and spray paints. I flood my canvases with varnishes and waters to create backgrounds with somewhat layered surfaces in which textural figures are then superimposed with the modeling medium that sort of create a bas-relief type of figure. However, I did not see this medium translating into the work for this particular Torah study. So I reread the Parsha again and again, and really what stood out for me was the reference that Moses could not do this alone, that there were many moving parts. You have the Levites, you have the tradesmen, the women, to make and create the structure, and the garments to assemble and disassemble the tent of meeting. I also thought about the architectural component, the building of this particular space, and what it meant to be space. And then there was an aha moment for me in this process of study that was compelling me to make sculptural, three-dimensional faces, but not just one face. And circling back to just as Moses thought, he could not do this alone. So I began making a community of people, honoring the people who helped in the building and creating the tabernacle. DeVere, is it possible to put up the first slide? Thank you. So for me, the interpretation of these faces of time were not meant to be realistic, but rather to capture what may have been discovered artifacts. So in the back of my mind, I was also thinking about, how do I display these people's faces? I thought at one time I would put them on pedestals where I can move them about and have, different sort of conversations with each other. But that didn't quite capture everything that I felt that was necessary to make, a tabernacle. So I continued thinking what was necessary for the tabernacle. And I also thought what it meant to be a tabernacle. And I decided that the Hebrew text for Pekudei would be the backdrop to these faces of time, as the Hebrew text describes all the information needed to create the tent of meeting. So I started to line up the text, the Hebrew text, and it reminded me of being in shul when the Torah is held up high to the congregation. And for me, that's the best part of the service. But this idea really quickly developed into a vision and a feeling that this piece would support the faces of time and be like a Torah open for the world to see. So it's interesting to note that when I was working on this piece, and it was actually finished, it was 20 inches high by 38 inches wide and 6 inches deep. Unintentionally, it's reminiscent to the height of a Torah. I had to Google that to find that out. So most Torahs are 19 inches. So anyway, the work contains in Hebrew the Pekudei Parsha, but it also includes the ending of Vayachel. And the relationship to include Vayachel was intentional, as I saw that nothing was static, nothing stands alone, and both portions fulfill God's instruction to build the tabernacle, to furnish it, and to make the garments. And so when we're talking about Vayachel, they talked about you must make. It was the vision, you must make this tabernacle. The Pekudei, where they made the tabernacle. Devere, could you go to the next slide, please? I want to get a detailed, thank you. So I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the materials, what the people represent, and talking about a little bit about what it means to fill the tabernacle. So the materials, when I thought about the materials, they were very purposeful. And I wanted them to have a feeling of being concrete or stone-like. I thought about the strong will of the people in order to make the tabernacle. So I thought it befitting that the faces would look like stone. The faces are not fully developed, and I thought they would be more like artifacts, as though they were uncovered from an archaeological site. They are worn, they're undefined, they're pitted, and they're fractured. And the backdrop too, the Hebrew writing at the bottom is eroded, and perhaps indicative of outside elements wearing away the parchment over many, many years. So I'd like to just take a quick tangent and talk about the lighting of this particular piece. When I was photographing it, I found that depending on the light source, it captured a different moment in time for the faces of time. And what I mean by that is that the people's faces became very multidimensional in a way that the light source and the shadows that were cast dictated whether they looked older, younger, masculine, or feminine. So these three-dimensional sculptural faces, and if you'd like, we can go back to the previous slide as a whole. Thank you. So these three-dimensional sculptural faces, these people are the faces of time that fill and fulfill the tabernacle. For me, they represent that it was all that was necessary to build a home for God. That we, all of us, we all carry the emotional and the physical embodiment, excuse me, that of being a tabernacle, a mishkan, wherever we go. So for each of us, that we are that vessel. We are that vessel that really holds and contains that tabernacle within us that fulfills God's will to make this world a home. So I saw it as what better place, our physical being, these faces of time, the people, us, as that vessel that fulfills God's will. So an outcome for me, from my studies with Rabbi London, is that one does not necessarily need an architectural structure to go to, but we, our bodies, our architectural space, is a tabernacle that resides within us in our bodily architectural form, where one can fulfill divine purposes, and that of being a tabernacle. So now I send it back to you, Rabbi Devere and Rabbi Eryn.
Just unmuting myself. I mean, number one, I've told Tina this before, so this is not the first time she's hearing it, but I have loved seeing the process and also the final product that has come about over the time that we've been talking and learning together, and how powerful the images are. And you're not showing it now, but one time when we were talking, Tina showed the pictures of the masks with different lighting, and they literally look like different pieces of work that she made. It's quite astonishing how something's theoretically so small, like lighting and angle, can drastically change our perception of what we're seeing and what we're experiencing. And I think it's not only true in art, but I think it's also true in life, of how certain things might seem one way when we look at it, and look at it a different way, and it's a different story, it's a different emotion, it's something else that's happening. And when I was thinking about this parsha, it was so, like, there's a part of me that one of my favorite people are Ohaliav and Bezalel, who are the artisans that are named in the parsha. But what was more striking to me this time around of reading was, what was the point of detailing all of this stuff, right? It's a long parsha of details, and we spoke about this quite often, was, what's the point of all this? Like, am I missing something? It just goes on, and like, who really cares about how much gold and silver, and that something was blue and something was purple? What's the point of that? It could have been aquamarine and orange, and we probably would have had the same story. And I think about this as basically the art installation of community. And what does that mean to be having our community center? Because that's basically what the Mishkan was. The Mishkan was the center of the community in the desert. It's where they went for holidays. It's where they went when they were joyous and were giving a sacrifice. It was when they were really troubled and were going for help. It sat physically in the middle. And what happens in our community space when we're able to describe it in such detail that even if you're not there, you can imagine it? So we can read through this parsha and we can imagine what the walls look like. We can even imagine what some of the smells were and what some of the sounds were and what the materials could feel like, right? Some of these materials, we know what they are. And so what is that experience? And so in that, I think about our communities today of, what are we doing to make our communities into a space where we could, which really become the heart, which become a place that we can imagine or describe even when we're not physically able to be there, or trying to describe it to people who are not always able to be with us. What are the sounds and the smells that we want people to think about when we're thinking about our shuls, our JCCs, our schools, whatever our center of community might be. And also, I think another huge part is, it comes back from the parsha before, Vayakel, this very striking verse, which says that everyone gave from their heart what they were able to do. And so here, again, we're evoking this community space where not only are we able to imagine what it looks like, but every aspect of the space can also remind us of the people in our community. Every person was able, right, and in whatever their abilities were, and I really believe that every person was able to contribute something. It might have been a monetary donation, it might have been a physical donation, it might have been sitting and sewing, it might have also been drawing water so that the artisans, didn't dehydrate in the desert, right? And so what does that add to our communities when we're not only able to see something that's beautiful and imagine it, but actually in every aspect we're also able to see each and every community member physically within our walls. and within our spaces. And at the very end of the Parsha, I think that it's also very striking of God telling everyone and reminding the Jewish people that God will be with them. That when the Jewish people will see the cloud, they'll know that God is there. They're either going to see a cloud, they're going to see a fire, which is a very, very different start to the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. Or because if we remember all these weeks back, I know it feels a long, long time ago, even though it wasn't all that long ago, right? The Jewish people were slaves in Egypt. They felt like God has abandoned them. And we end the Parsha with God not only saying, okay, I'm here, remember that, but actually I'm here and I'm going to make sure that you can see me and you can feel me no matter what is happening. And so I don't know, this Parsha that is full of details of how to build things turned into this, at least for me, this huge Parsha of a connection of community and a connection of community to God, which was very exciting and cool.
So I would just like to respond for a moment. I know that, the Parsha itself was very detailed in terms of the colors, the vivid colors. And as you mentioned, Rabbi Eryn, all the different components that it took to make, this Mishkan. And I'm just thinking that by painting the picture of all these, I guess in a way, material things, that I guess, when we look at things, we just take that deeper dive. What is it that we're really talking about? And I think for me, it just goes back to the richness of community, the richness of the person themselves, of what they can bring to the community. So that was just sort of one of those sparky moments, is that's what it felt like for me. While you might not have the colors have gone. We haven't really, you and I have not seen what it is. We don't have the artifact for that, but we have the idea of what it took to make a very rich community. And it's really the community that makes, the richness of the whole Mishkan.
Tina, looking at the piece, it's very interesting how the placement of the individuals are at different heights and at different places. Can you speak to your thought process and where to place them along the image?
I think that was just basically one of those creative licenses. I didn't want everything to be even. Nothing is even for me. So it was just maybe more that would feel musical, that it just had a nice flow to it. I'd like to give you a much better backstory, but I don't have one.
Oh, yes, Barry.
Yeah, just real quickly, just the thought, my impression of the work is, first, it almost has like an eerie quality to it. That's what I get. And looking at it, it causes me to just take pause. It causes me to stop. Okay. And I really think it's quite an interesting and good work. Thank you, Tina.
Well, thank you, Barry. And I see that you've got a new hat.
That's right. It's my lucky fishing hat.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, so when I was working through the piece, there are many more faces that I have created that were not put into this piece. But it was really just to try, in my mind, to capture, like, who were these people? As I mentioned, as though it might have been discovered from, an archaeological site. It was just something, the faces were discovered. And I think perhaps conceptually part of this piece takes me back that when as a young girl, actually, I just want to share this, I would always go to the Metropolitan Museum. And one of my first stops was always making a right turn into the museum to see the Greco-Roman statues and busts and faces. And I wondered, who were these people? Who are they? What were their lives like? And I think in a way, these faces in a way are trying to capture is like, who were the people, behind the face that created the tabernacle?
Rabbi, in your beautiful elocution, you described how central the Mishkan is, and what's kind of very striking about Tina's work is that the faces kind of hide in anonymity through whether they're weathered through time, but what are your thoughts on the lack of anonymity in that space, in that very everything is public, people's korbanot are very upfront and center?
My first reaction is that as it's both not anonymous and anonymous at the same time, because theoretically, at least the way that I imagine it, again, I don't remember my time being there. I don't know if anyone else does, please chime in. But, I think of this place that's very busy, and there are constantly people coming and going. And so maybe you're going to see people that but also maybe you're just going to be a face that shows up, because it's going to be, and I think that there's something actually quite special to that. Because if we think about the way that, you're right, if the Mishkan was in the center and then the tribes were in their, unit surrounding it, right? And each tribe had thousands of people, right? It wasn't, 10 people here and 10 people there. So there's a lot of ability that coming into the Mishkan, it's the one time that you're actually going to potentially see people from the other side. It might be that you haven't seen them for quite some time. It might be that you actually don't know them. If we think about, I don't know, the image of like Grand Central Station in New York comes into mind, right? And so maybe you're going to bump into someone that possibly, because you're commuting at exactly the same time and you commute at the same time every single day. Maybe, but most likely the randomness of bumping into someone that is slim. And also quite exciting when it does happen. I don't know. I'm a weird person that will be in New York City and bump into someone I know on the street. It has happened. Right. So to have that experience. And I think that part of communal life is balancing that place of being anonymous, but also not being anonymous, and choosing when do we want to be anonymous and when do we really, really not want to be anonymous. When do we want people to know what is going on? When do we want people only to sort of know what's going on? And when do we want no one to know, but to be able to have that time of privateness with the space, with God, with one other person, right? Depends on the situation. So I think it's really, it's a space of all of that.
Wow, what a beautiful description. And Tina, in your presentation, you had mentioned how important, like how interesting it is that the size of your piece corresponds to that of an actual Torah scroll. What significance does that bring and add to this piece?
It was just it was just unintentional, but very welcome. Because as I mentioned that, when I go to shul, the best part for me is when I see this, Torah being held up to the community, and it just evokes just a really emotive feeling for me. but in terms of the size, it was just by happenstance. I mean, the text that's in there, it is true to the Torah in terms of the lines and the spacing and the columns. I didn't realize it at the time that when I was using I downloaded the text. I didn't realize at the time how close it was to the size of the Torah. So it was unintentional, but delighted nonetheless. So I just wanted to feel, when it was done, is that when you hold the piece up, it would be as though you're holding up, the Torah scrolls to the community. I also want to, just, backpedal a little bit. You were asking about the faces, just not being very specific. And of course, they weren't meant to be explicit in any way, shape, or form, because I think it would take away from what's behind the anonymity, so to speak. And so, that was just very intentional for me, is that to be explicit just would have taken away, but to allow you to enter and look at the faces themselves and think about, perhaps who were these people? What was it like for them? They're worn, they're pitted, they're fractured a little bit. So aren't we all?
Wow. And it's so beautiful also that it's like we're bringing up the archaeology of this generation. The Mishkan only existed, were constructed by these people, and it kind of adds like an ode to this generation, to these individuals who constructed such a magnificent site. Susan, yes.
Yeah, in Shemo, if I recall, it's about remembering the names. And what I see in this art is actually remembering them by their spirit as a blessing. All of us, all the thousands of people that stood at the Mishkan. So I like that we've included, without a specific identity, but we've given them that Jewish identity to the Torah and remembering them for the blessings. And all of us are going to be remembered for all the blessings we've added to this lifetime. And thank you, Tina, for creating the art that you did. Hard to find you on the Zoom box. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It reinforces community, just as Vayachel is. It's the spirit of community, as many rabbis have said, but it's also the spirit of your heart. It's no accident, really, that you made it the way you did. It sounds like an accident, so to speak, as an artist, but it really was meant from Hashem's message to you.
And so beautifully also, to add to that point, thank you, Susan, that the beginning of the book of Exodus begins, these were the souls, the 70 souls that went down to Egypt, and kind of this depiction of these individuals and like depicting the souls of these individuals really speaks to the heart of what this entire book is about. Miriam. Hi. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Tina, it's a beautiful and a very meaningful piece. And, the last several weeks we've been studying the building of the Mishkan. And it has been, so many details. And I find that quite beautiful that so much intricate work was put into building the Mishkan. But I really appreciate your piece. Even though the faces are anonymous, they're still faces. And I think it's very nice to have that included. So thank you so much for that perspective.
Thank you, Miriam. Yeah, I guess in a way, because the Parsha was so rich in describing all that it took to make and create the tabernacle, you know, as I said, my mind went all over the place. It's like, how could I incorporate all of this? And for me, it just would have taken away from, I guess, the essence of what it was that the building of the tabernacle was all about. And that it would have been a home for God, a place for you to go to you know, have your own personal tabernacle. So the colors, in a way, for me, just got in the way. And that just having it just very, almost, it's not black and white, but it's sepia toned, or it would be as though it was worn, at least the Torah component is. But I just wanted to be as plain as to be, so that you can read your own thoughts into it without being distracted by colors or gold or other types of structures.
I see, Liz, you have a question.
I just wanted to say that, like, I guess I've always kind of found this parsha to be kind of boring. And I never really thought about it the way, you know, when you talk about your process and the space and how you think about all the details and it leads you back to the people. That's the kind of beauty, like that art like yours helps people like me connect to these portions with. So I want to say thank you. I'm so glad I could be here to hear this and participate today. Thank you so much.
And Liz, thank you so much for those thoughts, because that really means a lot. That in a way, I guess the piece is somewhat successful.
Oh, it's amazing. And truly, like, I mean, I've kind of struggled connecting, and especially when there's a portion like this that's all the details. So you've helped me to recognize that there's a deeper way to think about it, and actually even different avenues to come from. So thank you very much for that.
And it's so beautiful how, like, that was really at the core of the process as we studied this together. Was at first you'd struggled with, what's the purpose of making this so figurative, and like, how do we find deeper meaning beyond that? And it's been so beautiful to see how, instead of getting stuck in those details through this process, you've created this very beautiful composition that goes into a whole other direction and speaks so much to a different narrative than immediately meets the eye. Karen.
Yeah, I think I really thought it would be probably one of the easiest parshiot to create something out of, because it seems so, it's all about art and it's all about creation and all artistic. But the way you frame it, Tina, is so interesting, because I think what I see is that it's like, it's to really roll it back and to say, it's almost really about how do we relate in time. And the Mishkan of old, in some ways for us, is the Torah of today. It's where we meet God. It's where we study with God. It's where we enact and interact in some sort of way through that study, through prayer, through learning. And what I saw, I don't know if it's as evident in person in the piece, but by having the shadowing and by having the different images at different heights, it almost looks as if we're looking at sort of, it's almost perspective. It looks as if people are from different times. And so to me, it ends up being almost a meditation on, through time, how have we made that contact with God, and where does God reside with us in terms of our connection, and where at one time in the desert journey, it was in the Mishkan, and those people, now it's much more, I think, through Torah, and then through practice, and then through community and building, and all these other ways that we have that God resides, where God resides between us. So it turned into a very different kind of meditation than I would have imagined out of this parsha. But thank you so much. It's very beautiful.
Thank you.
That's an interesting also idea that you had raised, Tina, about how what's the context in which today we see the Torah. And you said that like when they open up the Torah in front of the community. And I'm curious, Rabbi, if you have any thoughts as well about how the synagogue kind of takes on that new place in our communities as that community center, as that ruckus house of people coming to visit the rabbi and coming to pray, and you only get to see these people once a year or a couple times a year, and all of those connection points that we have with the synagogue as a new center point in our communities, housing those interactions.
I think for some communities, the synagogue is, is that new place, and is that place of community and interaction, and where we go for pain, and we go for joy, and we go for connecting to God, and we go to speak for pastoral support, and we see our friends, we see our family, whether that is once a year or every week or every day or multiple times every day. And I also think that it sometimes takes place in other spaces, whether, in some communities it is, like the JCC, it might be certain restaurants, it might be certain roads where, that you're going to see everyone when you go there. I think also over the past 2 years, this idea of, where is our community center? Do we have a community center has really been taken into focus, and who is included and who's excluded every time we make a decision based on how are we opening our spaces, right? There are a number of people who are included when we open up virtually, and there are a number of people who are excluded when we're virtual. And there's a number of people who are included when we're in person, and there's a number of people who get excluded when we're only in person. And I think, many of the rabbis that I know are trying to figure out ways, or what is the best way to create this space of community that is excluding as few people as humanly possible, right? Because unfortunately, there will be people that will be excluded or feel excluded. But the goal is, how can we create a space that will exclude the fewest amount of people? And I think that space of how do we create our community centers, our shuls, back to be this place as a center of community that people feel like they're able to come into, whether in person or virtual, that they feel like they're able to get support, that they feel that they're able to see their friends and family, that they feel that they're able to connect with God. And spirituality is really working through that, so that our shuls really become this mikdash ma'at, this miniature tabernacle that the rabbis talk about.
Wow. Jewish life has kind of evolved from that point of just like a simple camp into there's all of these different connecting points. Richard, the stage is yours.
Anyway, hi, good afternoon, everyone. So as I'm hearing you talk about this, and I guess also a little bit in light of a recent Zoom session of the Jewish Art Salon, which was at noon today, in which 3 women artists presented their works, the contrast really is startling. It seems to me that we need to be at least aware of the problems of metaphorical thinking, that I think we have to at least have underneath, as we approach things like this Parsha and also trying to make art of it, we should at least understand that what was the Mishkan for? A Mishkan, yes, was the place for Jews to meet God and God to meet to Jews. But how did we meet God? We met God through sacrifices. The whole apparatus of the Mishkan and the entire apparatus of all the clothing, all the kalim, is to bring sacrifices. And the point of sacrifice is to take something from yourself, even though we understand that it's ultimately God's. We take something from ourselves and we offer it to the deity as a way of connection. And the lowest form is meal offerings. And basically the majority of the sacrifices are animals. It was a slaughterhouse. We killed animals, and the heart of, pardon the expression, the heart of the sacrifice was, of course, the animal's blood, its life. So the metaphors about community and this and that are all fine and good, but I think we have to also understand a historical reality that we should either be uncomfortable with or celebrate or have something about, but not ignore. And the thing that the last session of the Jewish Art Salon was that all three women were actively protesting the things they saw in Torah because of what they perceived as the less than desirable depiction of women and treatment of women within Judaism, within the community that we're talking about. So, I mean, I don't have any problem with the optimism and the attempt of spirituality, but I have a funny feeling that, except for very rare individuals, when me and you would walk up to the Mishkan and the sacrifice was going on, I'm not sure if you'd feel this spirituality that you'd have. You'd feel something and you'd feel awe because we assumed there was a reality of God's presence there. But it was very different than kind of what you're talking about, that how most of us may feel in shul on a Shabbos where everyone's together and it's celebratory and we're all of that. We don't have a Mishkan. We don't have a base of Mikdash in which the heart and soul of it was sacrifice. So we just have to have that in the back of my mind. And in a way, I think what Rabbi London was addressing just now really addresses that, of that we have to look at these structures and say, you know, what's still not right with them, or what still needs deeply to be improved. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Richard, thank you so much for sharing that. You know, as I move forward with my art and other pieces, I will definitely hold that close to heart. That's really important. And it was something that I was not thinking of when I did that. And we are actually, there is a lot of sacrifice that we are going, you know, through. And there's a lot that we're not sacrificing. And so that's a really important point, and I appreciate that. And that's really something I'm going to be looking at. You know, I actually have a piece that I'm going to be working on next that really is talking a little bit towards sacrifice in a way. But thank you. Very, very important. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And it's so important to kind of counterweigh between all of those thoughts of where do we lean into the art, and what ideas do we want to bring forth for inspiration, for inquisition. And I think this has been a beautiful exploration. We have more questions, so Barry, what's your...
Just real quick, just another thought. I think what Richard said, I think is true. I'm glad he brought that up. I mean, if you're looking at ancient Israel, biblical Israel, at its core, you're looking at some sort of sacrificial cult. And we can go into the people around Israel and the people in the area and all of that, and that's fine. But the point I want to make, and I understand and agree with what Richard said, if you take it, that's it. This is what it was. But with the fall of the Second Temple, all of that changed. Okay, and we go into rabbinic Judaism, and then it's a whole different story. At least that's my opinion. Okay, and other people may disagree with me. But once we get into rabbinic Judaism, and Judaism, in my opinion, has changed. Judaism changed. Okay, it's evolving now, actually. Okay, and in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I still think that the Torah, if you will, is a story of our ancestors, of an ancient people that tried to come to create something to come together. I guess what I'm trying to say, that even though Judaism has changed, the Torah absolutely, at least to me, has something still to offer, many things to offer that are germane or can be used in the way we interpret Judaism now. So that's just a thought.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's so important to explore how these ideas resonate with us. Yes. I see another question.
Yeah. I'm Susan Berkowitz, and my response to Richard's comments is that this was not, the Mishkan was not a sacrifice of people. It was tzedakah. It was a giving. The people gave so that they could build this place for God. I don't believe that they were sacrificing when they built the Mishkan. I'm not talking about the animal sacrifices later on. And the Torah, I believe, is still relevant today. And I think that's what Tina showed in her beautiful piece of art.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. In some ways, kind of that idea of the soul selfie, it's a snapshot before that conversation gets put into place. Right. We have Miriam. Would you also?
Well, I would just like to add, with the Mishkan, all the Israelites were asked to give a half of a shekel. So it was extremely inclusive because they all gave a half a shekel gladly. And then they donated above and beyond that. And as a matter of fact, they had too much money, too many donations. And they said, okay, please stop. We have too much. So, and the women too, the women, since they did not participate in the golden calf, in the making of the golden calf, they were very participatory in the Mishkan. They did a lot of the artwork and the sewing. And so the women were held in very high, esteem because of this. So I just see it as very inclusive. The Israelites, they wanted to do for the Mishkan, and it was, given out of pleasure, not, as a sacrifice.
Thank you. Yes. I just want to say, Tina and Rabbi Eryn, give yourselves a bow for this incredible conversation that you've incited in all of us, all of these ideas and questions. And everyone give a round of applause to this beautiful presentation. It's really incredible to see this work of art, to see how much time you've taken into thinking about each step along the way. And it's just made the process that much more fruitful. There's so much depth and layers. As Max wrote, this piece is transcendent. And I really agree with that idea of how it's in conversation, not just with this snapshot in time, but it becomes a conversation of the reception history. As we end the book of Exodus, what better a way of taking stock and Pekudei taking account of where we've gone on this journey in thinking about the people and thinking about community, and uncovering that for us has been just totally remarkable. So thank you for this presentation. Thank you for all of all that's been gleaned from that, and will continue as we continue to explore. For everyone who wants to read the sermon that was written about this, and to see more questions and ideas about the art, we will be posting shortly on the website, the Amen Institute's website, of all of that for this week. And I hope you all have a lovely Sunday as these ideas percolate within yourselves.
Rabbi, just on a final note, none of this could be made possible without your innovation in creating the Amen Institute and having art through Torah and having these very rich dialogues and expressions through Torah. So right back at you. Thank you.
Have a lovely afternoon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.